Good afternoon, recovery.
Good afternoon. Is Mr. available?
He's the revenues manager. His name goes out on all the correspondence. Can I help at all?
Well, we had gotten a correspondence from him. I have someone I'm assisting on the line. Her name is Helen. Helen, what was the name of the other agent you had spoken with?
That's the lady that was in court.
Okay. Is she available?
Yes. Can I ask who's calling?
Yes. My name is Marc Stevens, and I have a Helen on the line with me that I'm assisting.
Right. What company are you calling from?
I'm sorry?
What company are you calling from?
It's just me. I'm a consultant.
Right, okay. Bear with me a moment.
I guess it's just like here, they get a robo-sign for everything. We have a Maureen Green that doesn't even exist, and some of them have come very close to admitting that. Oh, it's just a name that's the computer puts on there. Oh.
Yeah, I met this lady in court, so this one's real.
Hello, Mrs. Can I help you?
Yes, my name is Marc Stevens. We were calling for Miss...
I'm speaking to her.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon me. I have a friend on. I'm assisting her. Her name is Helen. And there was it looks like a form letter that you had sent in response to a letter that Helen had sent.
Before you go any further, Mr. Stevens, without Mrs. permission, I can't discuss the case with you.
Oh, pardon
I'm
me.
here as well. I am here as well, and you have my permission.
Okay.
We had this was, I think, the second time that you had sent basically the same form letter. What we're asking for, what Helen is asking for, is evidence that the laws actually apply to her, and so.
Unfortunately, the laws do apply to her. It applies to everybody that lives in this country.
Well, what my question is, and aside from your opinion that they apply to everybody, unfortunately,
it's not my opinion. It's actually, the fact. The laws of this land cover everybody that lives in this country.
Well, what evidence?
I can't change that.
I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you for what evidence you have to rely on that it applies to Helen.
We've sent it all out to her with regard to the legislation and the fact that the law of this land governs everybody. I can't give her anything else.
Okay, well, you may not, but however, other than giving us the actual code and saying it applies to everybody, what evidence is there that it does apply to anybody, or at least to Helen?
It's the law. Unfortunately, it's the law of this land, and everybody is governed by it.
But what evidence do you rely on that applies to Helen?
Mrs. is due in court on Friday.
Yes.
She will have to attend court and take the matter up. I can give her nothing else. The laws of this land govern everybody that live in this country, and Mrs. is living in this country, and she is governed by those laws and legislation.
Okay, but what evidence do you have to actually prove that?
That's irrelevant. She is living in this country, and she has to abide by all the laws in this country.
Did you say it was irrelevant whether there was evidence that the laws applied?
The laws apply to everybody that lives in this country.
What makes you think that's true, though? What evidence are you relying on?
It is true.
Yeah, but I'm asking you
what... how she can change that.
Miss, I'm asking you what facts you rely on to prove that that's actually true.
We're going nowhere with this conversation. Mrs. is due in court on Friday. She will have to take that matter up with the court, but she is governed by the legislation of this land, and if she hasn't paid her council tax, then we will be applying for a liability order on Friday.
My question, though, and you don't seem to be able to answer. You just keep going around in a circle and giving me the opinion. What evidence do you have it applies to her?
The fact that the law exists
The
is
fact
evident.
that the law exists? Excuse you, just pardon me. Let me write that down.
We're not getting anywhere with this conversation. I can give you no more information than I've sent Miss in writing.
Well, you're saying that the fact that the law exists, just because the law exists, what evidence is there that it actually applies to her?
You cannot change it. The law is there. It is something that is governed by, it governs everybody that they have to do or can't do. It's legislation and it's the law of this land.
But I understand.
Everybody.
But how does it apply to Helen? How does it actually apply to Helen?
Because she lives in this country.
What
she
makes
lives in a property,
okay,
and she's responsible for a property.
What makes you believe that just because she physically lives there that it actually applies? What makes it apply to her?
The law states it
The law
does.
states. All right, just pardon, let me write that down.
Miss got all the information I can supply her. She will have to take this matter up before the magistrates. I can't discuss it any further with you.
Well, just one moment, ma'am. When you say that the law states it applies, you're saying that the evidence that the law applies is the law itself. That's kind of circular. That really isn't evidence.
I'm sorry, you're going round in circles and we're getting nowhere.
Well, actually, I'm not the one going around in circles. I'm asking...
You will have to attend the court and the magistrates will make a decision at the court. The laws of this land govern everybody that live here. Miss lives in this country. She is governed by those laws.
You're kind of going in a circle because you're saying that
I'm just stating the fact. The legislation exists and she is responsible for the council tax at that property.
Well, actually, you are going in a circle. You said the law states it applies. So if I'm asking you for evidence that the law applies and you say let me finish. Miss
Local Government Finance Act, that is where it states who has to pay council tax.
But I'm asking you what evidence you have it applies, and you're going back to the code. I'm asking you for what evidence it applies.
It's not the code, it's the law of this land.
Well, code, what evidence do you have that the law applies to her? And you said that the law applies...
As I said, it's the same for everybody. It's the legislation.
I'm not interested in everybody.
Liable.
What I want to get to is this statement you made that the law states it applies. If I'm asking you for evidence... But that's circular. That's not evidence that it applies. You're using the code itself as evidence of itself. That's circular. That's not evidence.
Mr. owns the property. The property is within the Arran District Council area. She lives in that property. She is responsible for that property. Therefore, she is liable for council tax on that property.
But saying that the law states it applies is just circular. That's not evidence.
That is nothing else I can state other than that the law states she is liable.
Okay, well, but that's not evidence. But that's not evidence that applies.
It is evidence.
No, that's circular. Saying that the law applies because the law applies.
I'm sorry, I'm not going on with this conversation any further. You're not being productive. She is liable for the council tax. If she says she's not, she has to come to court on Friday, and then we will take it from there.
Well, Miss, do you have a supervisor or a manager I can speak with?
You can speak to my manager if you wish. Hold on a moment.
Okay.
Just transferring you.
Okay. I don't know if it's a delay or not, or we're just speaking over each other before. But let's try not to.
Hello.
Yes.
My name's. I'm the revenues manager.
Oh. My name is Marc Stevens. We were just. I have Helen on the line. We were just speaking with Miss.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you know of the situation. We just want, for the last, month or so, we've been asking for evidence that the laws actually apply to Helen. And really the best that Miss can do is, she said, the fact that the law exists and the law states it applies. And I had pointed out that was circular. She got a little perturbed and accused me of being circular and didn't think we were having a productive conversation. And that her position is that the law says it applies, and she has to go to court and address the issue on Friday. My position is, it's very simple, that if I'm asking for evidence that the law applies, and she's telling me the law states it applies, that's circular. That's a circular argument. That's not actual evidence. So we still would, if there's, if all Miss has against Helen is a circular argument and no actual evidence of jurisdiction, that the matter should be withdrawn.
So let me get this right. So Mrs. is resident in a property in Arran.
No, I believe she has a property in that area. I would not use the legal phrase resident.
So where is she living?
Well, she's living she is living in.
Okay, so if she's living in, then she's liable to pay council tax for that address.
Well, that's the prevailing opinion. We wanted evidence to actually prove that the laws applied.
Okay, well, she needs to read the Local Government Finance Act 1992 then, which will apply to those circumstances.
Well, see, that's getting more into the circular thing. We want evidence that the laws themselves apply, not any one particular one. So you're doing the same thing. Basically, you're saying that the law applies because the law says so. We want evidence, some tangible proof that the codes or the laws apply in the first place.
Well, the Local Government Finance Act is legislation. It's the law of the land. And if she's resident and living in that address, then she is liable to pay council tax for that address.
And that's according to the law, right?
Yeah.
Right, but that's circular. We want evidence that it actually applies, evidence beyond the code. What evidence that the laws actually apply, not just saying that the laws... Well, let me finish. By saying that because the law says so, that's not evidence that the laws actually apply. That's a circular argument. It's like saying the Bible is true because the Bible said so.
Well, I believe it does apply.
Well, I know you believe that, but what evidence is your belief based on?
That she's living in our area and she's liable to pay council tax.
But what evidence do you have that because of her physical location, your codes or your laws apply to her?
Well, she's living there, isn't she? So she's liable to pay council tax.
Why? What evidence do you rely on that because she's here, these laws apply?
The Local Government Finance Act says that she is liable to pay council tax.
Again, you're in the same position that the law states it applies, but what evidence do you have it actually does? Because the law said
the legislation says it does.
But that's circular. That's
I don't believe it is circular.
It is circular because I'm asking for evidence.
I don't believe it is.
You don't. So
No.
You think that just because you wrote something or some other people wrote something down on a piece of paper, it just automatically applies to Helen? Just because they wrote it down?
The legislation that states that if you are resident in a property, then you're liable to pay council tax for that property.
Okay, but what evidence is there
how can that be circular?
Because you're saying the evidence the code applies is the code itself.
I'm not saying anything. I'm interpreting the law as I see it should be applied.
Well, what evidence? When I ask for evidence that the law applies to Helen, and you say the law says, is your answer?
Well, you need to read the Local Government Finance Act. Then,
I don't need to read
to
anything.
See that it does apply.
But it has to. What evidence is there that it applies in the first place?
Well, the law of the land, the government statuted that law. That law under the Local Government Finance Act has a number of schedules, a number of statutory instruments attached to that. And that's how we interpret who is liable to pay council tax.
What evidence do you use when you apply it to somebody? I'm not talking about your interpretation. I'm talking about your application. You're applying these laws. These are just rules written down by people you and I and Helen have never met. You're saying that these rules, these things apply to Helen. What facts do you have other than the law itself that it applies?
Well, I don't need to provide any other facts.
You don't
She's resident in that property and therefore is liable to pay council tax for that property.
But you have no evidence other than saying the law itself says it's applicable. You have no actual evidence it does apply.
Well, again, I don't know how else I can explain this to you. If Miss believes she shouldn't be liable to pay council tax for that address, she needs to state that at court on Friday.
She's done this, a number of times. All you're able to do is go back and use a circular argument, saying, "Well, the law says you're applicable. It applies."
That's the argument we're going to use.
So you're going to use a circular argument?
We're not going to use a circular argument. We're going to use the Local Government Finance Act in the case that she is resident at a property and therefore she is liable to pay council tax for that property in accordance with the Local Government Finance Act 1992, and I think it's Section 6 of the Act.
But the only evidence that you seem to have that the Act applies is the Act itself.
Well, that's your interpretation and that's my interpretation. If you want a answer to that, then I can only suggest you go to court or with Miss on court on Friday.
Well, she's going to be doing that, but don't you think good faith dictates that you have the evidence before you go to court? You have the evidence before you send someone something in the mail.
Again, I think we've made the right decision, and she's liable to pay council tax. That's all I can say.
No, I get that, but we keep going back to this circular argument that the law applies because the law says it applies. I mean, I could say that you owe me so much money.
My interpretation is that she's liable to pay council tax. If you want to dispute that, then she goes to court on Friday. That's that's all I'm going to say.
Well, I get that it's your interpretation. I'm wanting to find out what evidence it's based on, and the only thing you can give me is that the code applies because the code applies.
If you want to go to court on Friday, go to court on Friday.
Well, we're trying to do what we can.
That's not going to be avoided now. No.
So you're not going to. You've got nothing beyond the code applies because the code applies.
We're governed by the legislation, and we believe she's liable to pay council tax in accordance with that legislation.
Yeah, and we keep going back to that.
And that's what we're going to use. And if you've got something different, then we'll deal with it in court.
Well, that's the thing. Court's supposed to be a drastic resort. You're supposed to do everything you can to resolve the matter before you go to court. So good faith dictates that if you had evidence, to put it on the table. But at this point, all you have is the code apply, or the law applies because the law says it applies.
Well, if Miss pays the full council tax, then there won't be any need to go to court. I would suggest that might be a resolution as well.
Well, that's like a highway robber. Pay me or I shoot you. But, that's not a solution. Would also be why don't you either put the evidence on the table?
Well, let me put this in another way. Then, if Mrs. was let's say her house was on fire, would you want the fire brigade to come out to her?
Well, let me respond with the same thing. What if my beer was being stolen from the other protection guy, and I needed Al Capone to come in and break this guy's knees? Trying to justify a protection racket.
I think you should. Let's the magistrates deal with it on Friday, and we'll take it from there.
Well,
okay.
I think it's an issue of good or bad faith here, and I think it's in bad faith.
I don't.
Well, you keep interrupting me, sir.
I don't think you are behaving in good faith, to be perfectly honest. I think you're trying to avoid paying the council tax.
I don't think you're doing
that in the right way.
I believe that you're forcing people to pay something, and by forcing people when they have no consent, no freely given consent, that itself is bad faith. I mean, you won't doubt that people don't have a choice. You either pay or you go to jail. That doesn't sound like good faith to me. And then to say that your laws, you're going to apply these laws to Helen because the law says so, you're just saying because someone wrote down on a piece of paper that this applies to Helen, and you run with it, and you have no other evidence other than someone wrote it down on a piece of paper, right? I mean, that's really the only evidence you have.
If that's your interpretation, that's your interpretation. It's not mine.
Well, how am I getting the facts wrong then? How is it different than just some strangers got down and wrote something?
You read the legislation?
Well, they were written by men and women, right?
Have you read the legislation?
I have not. No, I have not.
Have you read the legislation? Yes or no?
No, I haven't. I haven't.
Right. Okay. Well, I would suggest you read it.
Why?
And then perhaps. Because it quite clearly states who is liable to pay council tax.
But it doesn't show any evidence that it applies to anybody. Just words on a piece of paper doesn't mean that they apply to anybody. How so?
And that's why I think you need to read it.
But how so? How does just putting the words on a piece of paper make it apply to Helen?
Because it's signed off by the Queen. It's statuted under the Local Government Finance Act. There are various statutory instruments attached to that have all been signed off by the Secretary of State. It is the law that governs the land at the moment.
So just because some people put this down on a piece of paper, whether you call them the Queen, God, or...
I don't know why you have to go around saying that it's just something written down on a piece of paper. Well, it's legislation. It's the law that we all have to abide by, or should all abide by. And as far as we are concerned, our district council are concerned, Mr. is liable to pay the council tax because of the way that we interpret or have interpreted the legislation in accordance with the Local Government Finance Act 1992.
So you think that when you put things down on paper and call it legislation, it just magically applies to everybody because you say so?
We haven't put anything down on paper. The government has put something down on paper, and we are instructed to act upon their instructions in accordance with that law, and that is what we have done.
Yeah, but you're calling a group of people government. What makes it what makes what they say different? Their words become when they put them down and just call it legislation. Does it magically just apply to everyone because they said so?
Again, you went round in circles with Miss, and you're doing exactly the same thing here.
No,
the court case is not going to be withdrawn before Friday. I would suggest that if you don't want the liability order to be applied for, that Mr. turns up on Friday and discuss it with the magistrates. I'm not going to discuss the matter with you anymore. I don't think we're getting anywhere. That's it. Okay.
Oh, no, I don't think I've gone around the circle. But
I'm gonna put the phone down now. Okay.
Oh, you don't need to hang up.
All
There's
right.
no need to get even more rude and hang up the phone. That's fine. But I think we accomplished a bit. You have nothing but a circular argument. The law applies because the law says so, and it's unfortunate that you won't drop it now. But hopefully the right thing will be done on Friday.
Okay. We'll take it from there then. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay then.
All right,
Bye bye.
thank you.